to address the third question, what caused the global warming 100,000 years prior to the main phase of flood basalt volcanism? Let's look at our chapter 3. Flood basalts are the surface extent of large igneous provinces. They are the Earth's largest volcanic eruption episodes when significant portion of biological species went extinct. And they also correlate in time with hyperthermal events. For example, the largest Siberian trap correlate with Permian and Triassic mass extinction and the hyperthermal. The Deccan traps correlate with the Cretaceous Paleogene mass extinction, the most famous extinction of dinosaur. And also, as I will show, there's a big warming events around that boundary. Today, we are going to focus on the Deccan trap and the Columbia River basalt for this chapter. The Deccan trap are basaltic lava flows that cover about 20% aerial extent of India and has an average thickness of 2 kilometers. What triggered this more than 1 million cubic kilometer of lava extruded onto the Earth's surface is still controversial. However, recent geochronology and climate data might shed light on this process. So panel A shows the elevation map of Western Ghats, India. The black line denotes cross-section XX prime shown at the bottom. Geochronology samples are collected at where indicated with the color dots. The volumetric stratigraphy column on the upper left is estimated with geochronology results for timing of eruption and with the thickness of each formation. Converted that with time, you can see this graph showing time from left to right. And here's the extrusive flux indicated by this color box, where what you can see is that the onset of more than 75% of total volume of Deccan trap was erupted after the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary. And a recent paper compiled benthic Del 018 data globally was able to find a global temperature change at around that time. And they found a 2 degrees C warming 100,000 years prior to KPG. When we overlap the two data together, we can see the onset of global warming was 300,000 years prior to the onset of major phase of flood basalt eruptions. Now let's take a look at Columbia River basalt that was erupted around mid-Miocene. Similar trend happens. So as you can see, this is the Del 018 data, and another study using geochronology dating of the flood basalt indicate 95% of total volume was erupted 400,000 years after the onset of warming. So from these two intriguing data, we try to ask a question: what caused the abrupt global warming 100,000 years before the flood basalt main phase of flood basalt volcanism? To answer the unknown, let's first take a look at some observational constraints. So first of all, we know that the intrusion beneath these LIPs has much larger volume than that of extrusives. And seismic velocity and gravity anomaly beneath Deccan trap indicate higher velocity structure, and also higher gravity anomaly indicate denser crust beneath this flood basalt. Same thing happens for Columbia River basalt, higher gravity anomaly and higher seismic velocity. With our chapter 2, which indicate you need denser crustal intrusion to pull down the surface, that also indicate denser crust. Then we look at the relationship between magma and CO2. We know that CO2 is very sensitive to the pressure in the magma. When the magma ascends with lower pressure, CO2 should exhaust almost completely. And also it has very low partition coefficient in the magma. So when magma crystallizes at depth, CO2 could exhaust from that. Field evidence from Yellowstone or East Africa rift indicate very high CO2 flux from the surface. So to summarize, CO2 could exhaust from crystallizing low viscosity basaltic magma and go up quickly under buoyancy through cracks or the transcrustal magmatic systems. Now, to address the initial question with all the observational constraints, we can translate that question into a new question. Is it possible to have larger volume of magma intrusion that release CO2 to the atmosphere and cause warming some 100,000 years prior to major phase of eruption? And to answer that question, we need to first answer what controls timing of main phase of flood basalt eruptions. And we propose crustal density filter for controlling large-scale magma eruption. The physics is very simple, just water level device. If both sides has the same density, say crustal density, and the pressure is the same at bottom, then they should reach the same level. However, for a little bit denser magma, given the pressure provided on the left, the magma won't reach the surface because it's denser. But if you replace significant amount of the crust with solidified denser intrusion, then the pressure is higher. So it's able to allow the magma to reach beyond the initial surface. And there's evidence from mid-ocean ridge basalts shows that the eruptive mid-ocean ridge basalt lies within this window of eruptibility, where their iron content allows them to have a more buoyant density than the crustal density. Also, a deeper magma length correspond to thicker extrusive, showing the similar physics. So if we have low density country rock, then that of the magma density, then the magma cannot erupt. However, if we have denser country rock and has a higher density overburden, it will drive the magma to erupt. We know that the density increases with depth for the Earth. So let me illustrate with a simple two-layer density structure and show the importance of depth of seal. If we have a shallow seal, then the overburden density of that seal is less dense than the magma density, so no eruption. However, if the seal is able to is at a deeper depth, the average density of the overburden is the average of the blue and the black crust. So the average density could be larger than that of the magma and can drive eruption. With a global average continental crust density and assume a magma density of 2,800, you will need to have a seal deeper than 27 kilometers in order to allow it to extrude to the surface. And if seal shallower than that, will have difficulty to reach the surface due to the pressure. However, if we have densified crust for some LIPs, the lithostatic pressure will become higher, and hence a shallower seal is able to extrude to the surface, to supply magma to extrude to the surface. Based on this information, we find the key for determining large-scale eruptibility is to compare the average overburden density of the seal, rho OB, with the magma density, rho M. And when the rho OB is less dense than that of the magma, the overburden form a low density barrier and intrusion is favored. However, when rho OB is larger than that of the fluid magma, then it will form a high density driver to prefer eruption. We assume a constant magma density for the basaltic magma, and then let's take a look what controls the average density for the seal overburden. As we shown earlier, the depth is important. The deeper the seal, the higher the seal overburden. Another thing is important is the density structure. If part of the crust is replaced by densified seal intrusion, then the overburden density for the same level of seal intrusion could become larger and drive eruptions. Now, let's take a look at a conceptual model with 4 stages evolution. Assuming a Gaussian shape of magma supply flux, initially it's low, so the seal can only intrude into warmer and weaker lower crust. And at this point, the upper part overburden density is less dense than that of magma, and it's mostly intrusion. As the magma flux increases, the seal is able to intrude to shallower depth. And again, the overburden density is less dense than that of magma. And then as we keep increasing, the flux allow the seal to intrude to the shallowest depth. However, at this point, the flux begin to decrease and the heat input lower. So the seal is not able to sustain the heat loss to the surface at that shallow depth. The seal has to intrude into much deeper depth. But because this part of the upper crust has been replaced by the previously intruded seals, the density structure along with the deeper seal depth cause the average density of the seal overburden become larger than that of the fluid magma, and main phase eruption happens. Then based on this idea, we build this analytic steady state model for relating the flux F of m to intrusion depth of the seal, assuming again a Gaussian shape of flux of magma. The heat input scales with intrusion flux. So the heat input Q in is scales with F of m. The heat lost is just scales with the thermal gradient. So it's the temperature of the magma divided by the depth of the seal Z in and times the heat conductivity. When we equate the two, so the heat is balanced, then we can find that the seal intrusion depth is inversely proportional to the magma flux F of m. Here is a plot of that. So here's the flux, and here is the seal intrusion depth. Because of the seal first intrude upward and downward, replace the part of the crust with densified seal. As we go back down, the average overburden of the crust become denser than that of fluid magma. And here is the point where onset of main eruption phase could happen. And as you can see, it's after the major intrusion happened. And this model has several limitations because of simple assumption like instant heat transfer. It causes error in timing. So built upon Annan 2006 numerical multi-seal model, where a series of seal intruding into the crust and to perturb the thermal structure. And also we consider there's no density and mechanical consideration for seal depth, but we are going to explicitly determine seal depth based on the crustal thermomechanical condition shown here. So basically, every time the seal intrude at a depth with maximum breakout pressure, which I will describe now. So we would let us zoom in this part. Because the crustal density increases with depth, the static pressure PL show increasing gradient with depth. Assuming constant magma density, a magma reservoir at the borehole and magma within the reservoir has the same pressure as the lithostatic pressure. We have the magma static pressure shown with the red dashed line. Along an open conduit from the reservoir up, due to density difference between the magma and the crust, magma overpressure is computed by subtracting lithostatic pressure PL from the magma static pressure PM, and its maximum at the level of neutral buoyancy, where crustal density equals to the magma density. Physically, magma overpressure means the extra magma pressure compared with the lithostatic pressure the fluid magma acting on the wall rock of the conduit. And then the green region indicate the resistant pressure for opening a large seal. It comprises the thermal arrest pressure, PTA, and horizontal compressive stress, sigma H. The thermal arrest pressure is the minimum pressure required to drive a fluid magma to intrude in a large distance into the colder country rock before the magma freezes. The horizontal compressive stress, sigma H, is induced by magma overpressure and can be relaxed based on viscosity structure with depth. If near the surface where viscosity is high, compressive stress sigma H is not relaxed quickly. It will prevent further upward migration of magma. You can think of resistant pressure as likelihood for a seal formation. The larger the PR, the less the likelihood. So when you use PD minus PR, we can have a breakout pressure, PBK. And then we find for each time step, the maximum depth for PBK to intrude a seal, which brings in heat and basaltic magma that can later solidify, become denser and stronger. Here is the model results. Again, 4 stages. As the flux increases and then decreases, it forms this seal depth from deeper to shallow and then go back down deeper. We assume a piecewise linear temperature structure here. And here's the solidus, liquidus determining the density of the basaltic intrusion. And the vertical green line is the overburden density, average overburden density, and the red is the fluid magma density. As the flux increases, the seal is able to intrude upwards and warm up the crust and leave behind it a series of solidified seal that densify the crust. As the flux keep increasing, the seal depth go to the shallowest depth. And at this point, what's above is still normal crust, which has an average overburden density less dense than that of the fluid magma, so no eruption happen. Eventually, as the magma flux decrease, the heat input is not able to sustain shallow intrusion. Now the seal jump back down to where it's hot and weak. And at this point, the upper part of the crust has been replaced by densified seal intrusion, and the overburden density now is larger than that of the fluid magma. Whenever magma can come into this seal, the magma can erupt easily to form flood basalt eruptions. As you can see, as the seal crystallize, bubbles of volatiles like CO2 can escape and release into the atmosphere during intrusion phase. Here is a video showing the process. So the upper part is the seal depth overlap with the flux, and left is the temperature structure evolution, right is the pressure evolution. The main thing to determine eruption is this pressure from the seal. If it is positive at the surface, then eruption could happen. It's equivalent to overburden density compared to that of the fluid magma. So as you can see, as it proceeds with increased magma flux, the seal depth go shallower, and then it go back deeper. And because of the densified intrusion, the magma driving pressure is become larger. And eventually, as the seal depth go back deeper, the eruption could happen. Let's take a look at it again. So now it's mainly crustal seal intrusions. And as the seal go back deeper, the replaced densified crust allowed overburden density to be larger, and then eruption could happen. And then let's take a look at a comparison between numerical model density with that of the observed density structure. So initially, we assume a global average linear density structure. As the seal keep intruding upwards, it replaced the solidified seal become denser and create this densified density structure beneath it. And as the flux begin to decrease, the seal cannot sustain shallow depth, so it begin to go back deeper. At this time, the overburden density is still lower than that of fluid magma, so no major phase of eruption could happen. And eventually, as the seal keep going deeper, the overburden density is now larger than that of fluid magma, and main phase of flood basalt eruption could happen. And we have a density profile to compare with the decant trap, what's under decant trap. We know from samples of like picrites, melt inclusion of picrites, we can know the concentration of barium, niobium, and the ratio between barium, niobium to CO2. These allow us to estimate a range of CO2 concentration of 0.1 to 2% weight percent in original mantle derived magma. And for simplicity, we just assume around 1 weight percent of that concentration. So from the modeled intrusion and eruption volume of magma flux with a assumed concentration of CO2 in the mantle melt, and also with some previous referenced outgassing efficiency from intrusion and extrusion, we can calculate a magmatic carbon outgas flux based on that model results. And these carbon flux can, and here shows the carbon flux based on the model runs. So here's the magmatic flux, and here's the outgas flux with the extrusive flux. When we input this carbon outgas flux into a simple box long-term carbon cycle model LOSCAR, we can then have a atmospheric concentration of PCO2 with time, which lag behind the assumed magma, Gaussian-shaped magma flux. And this CO2 concentration, atmospheric CO2 concentration can be translated to global temperature change to compare with the data. And as you can see here, there's a warming 100,000 years prior to the major phase of eruption. So to answer the third question, what caused the global warming prior to main phase of flood basalt volcanism? Here is our conclusion. We argue that major eruptions of continental flood basalt may require densification of the crust by intrusion of larger volumes of magma that are extruded. And simple model could show that magma crystallization and release of CO2 from such intrusion could produce global warming before the main phase of flood basalt eruptions on the observed timescale. And our model further suggests that the evolving crustal density